The story begins with and burden, a young woman living in a world devastated by a nuclear attack. The valley where she resides, once her family's farm, remains untouched by the fallout, protected by its steep hills and clean, underground water sources. In this isolated pocket of survival, she believes she is the last person alive, with no contact from the outside world, as all the radio stations have long gone silent, and has learned to rely entirely on herself. There's a small store near her farmhouse, but there's not much left. She visits it for basic needs, but when she requires more vital supplies, she walks to the nearby ghost town, fully suited up in protective gear to avoid lingering radiation. She leads a disciplined, self-sufficient life, setting traps to catch whatever animals remain. Her only companion is her loyal dog, Pharaoh, who shares in the daily grind of survival. Together, they tend to the farm, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy in a world that's anything but. Though the valley is safe and never ventures beyond its borders, out there, the air is still thick with radiation. Years ago, her parents and neighbors had left in search of survivors, but none ever returned. Since then, and has lived alone, keeping her routines to stay busy, her thoughts constantly wandering to what might be left beyond the valley's protective walls. One day, while checking her traps with her dog Pharaoh, and realizes that one of the traps has failed, the animal has escaped. Determined to find it, she follows the trail with Pharaoh, walking silently along an old road. As they continue, and comes across a wagon parked along the roadside. Curious, she carefully approaches and spots a man in a hazmat suit walking along the old road. She quickly hides, quietly watching him with her dog by her side. After analyzing the area and realizing it's safe, the man removes his suit. He lets out a scream of relief, celebrating his freedom. She quietly follows him with Pharaoh, staying hidden until the man, unaware of her presence, removes his suit and jumps into a stream for a swim. And, knowing the water is contaminated, shouts a warning for him to get out, but he is startled by her sudden appearance. Panicking, he points a gun at her, unsure if she's a threat. And, calm and unfazed, slowly puts down her weapon to show she means no harm. She explains that the stream is dangerous, its water tainted by the contaminated areas beyond the valley. After hearing her out, he finally listens, gets out of the water, and hurries back to his wagon, where he administers medicine to himself, already falling ill from the exposure. The man introduces himself as John Loomis, an engineer who survived by staying in a distant government bunker. As the water begins to affect him, and helps him and heads back to the farmhouse. For the next several days, he is bedridden, and cares for him, bringing over his wagon and discovering a photo of a woman, possibly his wife. Despite his initial wariness, N's care helps him slowly recover, and she even prays for his health, desperately longing for companionship after so much time alone. As John's health improves, he begins adapting to life in the valley. During quiet moments, they share stories of their lives before the apocalypse, and shows him her family pictures and talks about her parents and neighbors, who had set out years ago in search of survivors but never returned, leaving her to face this world alone. She especially misses her younger brother, with whom she was very close, and shares memories of him with John. During their conversation, John explains how Anne's farm is protected from radioactive contaminants, thanks to the rocky hillsides and favorable weather patterns. Afterward, Anne feels a rare connection and hugs him, something she hasn't done in a long time. The next day, John steps outside to help on the farm and notices an old tractor in the field, and explains that she ran out of gas last year and hasn't been able to use it since, as she couldn't pump more without electricity. John sees a solution and explains how, and can manually pump gas from a nearby abandoned station. Following his instructions, she successfully fuels the tractor, bringing it back to life. Later that day, over dinner, they talk more about their lives before the apocalypse. John shares how he lived in a government bunker 1 mile underground, but left because he couldn't bear being without sunlight any longer. Curious, and asks about the pictures in his wagon, but John explains they're of a woman from his past, not his wife. As the days pass, Anne and John grow closer. One afternoon, while frying fish by the pond, their conversation drifts to the farm and mentions that there used to be a generator in the farmhouse, but it's been broken for some time. John, intrigued, offers to take a look and fix it, so it could help them store food for the winter. While working on it, John gets an idea. He suggests they could generate hydroelectric power from the nearby waterfall using a water wheel. Excited by the possibility, he shares his plan. Filled with fresh hope, they rush to the waterfall to explore the idea further. As they walk through the misty forest, John explains his plan in more detail. When they arrive, he suggests using wood from Anne's father's church to build the water wheel, and agrees at first, understanding the need for materials. But when they reach the church and John mentions needing most of the planks, she hesitates. The church, built by her father and filled with memories, is too important to her. Sensing her attachment, John respects her decision and decides not to pursue the idea. Their days are filled with hard work, but cracks start to show between them, especially over their views on work and faith. One evening, Anne finds John drunk, surrounded by empty beer bottles. He teases her, mocking how she's been eating sweets from the shelves but never touches the beer. Staying calm, Anne helps him to bed despite his snide comments. As she tries to make him more comfortable by taking off his dirty clothes, John suddenly snaps. He pushes her away, insisting he doesn't need her help, and in his frustration, he pins her against the wall. Shaken, Anne quietly leaves the room, her heart racing as she tries to process his outburst. The next morning, John, sober and remorseful, apologizes sincerely. Though still rattled, and accepts his apology, hoping it was just a momentary lapse. They continue working together as if nothing had happened the night before. That evening, during dinner, Anne surprises John with a bottle of wine. As they drink, the tension eases, and after a few glasses, they're both feeling tipsy. The mood lightens, and they start dancing together in the living room, laughing and swaying, enjoying each other's company. The moment gradually becomes more intimate, and they share their first kiss. Their kiss deepens, and soon they move upstairs, the tension between them growing. But just as things are about to escalate, John stops. He gently pulls away, admitting that taking this step would change everything between them. While he confesses his feelings for her, he explains that they need more time to truly get to know each other before going further. The next day, while checking her farm, Anne notices changes in her traps. Pharaoh seems unusually excited and runs through the forest, with Anne following closely behind. As they move, Anne suddenly stops, shocked to see a figure standing nearby. The man introduces himself as Caleb, a third survivor, and quickly assures her that he means no harm. He's just looking for a glass of water. Caleb explains that he walked 50 miles from a mine, searching for food and supplies. And, still cautious but empathetic, invites him to the house. However, when they arrive, John panics and immediately points his gun at Caleb, and quickly steps in, calming John and assuring him that Caleb isn't a threat. She introduces the two men, but John remains wary. He tells Caleb he can stay, but insists, for safety reasons, that Caleb camp outside for the time being due to potential radiation exposure. Later, before allowing Caleb inside, Anne and John talk it over. John is firm at first, insisting Caleb stay outside, but after some discussion and gentle arguments, he reluctantly agrees to let him in. Anne's kind nature wins out, and they invite Caleb into the house, where they share a meal together. Around the table, they exchange stories about the horrors they've each faced in this post-apocalyptic world, bonding over their shared experiences. After some time, John shares a painful memory of coming across a sickly teenager who begged him for death. John did, as the boy asked. Later, Caleb shares his own story from the mine where he survived, talking about how, in the early days of the apocalypse, he saw men killing each other out of desperation. After the meal, and shows Caleb to his room where he'll stay for a few nights. Caleb thanks her, saying it's more than comfortable. When Anne returns to the basement, John expresses his reluctance to keep Caleb in the house, still uneasy about his presence. And, visibly frustrated, changes the subject. She asks why he never told her about the young man he encountered, the one he mentioned during dinner. John's expression tightens as he privately reveals to and that the boy he killed may have been her long-lost brother, and is devastated, struggling to process the shocking news. She remains silent, barely able to meet John's eyes, her mind reeling. After a long pause, and finally speaks, her voice trembling with emotion. She admits to John that the reason she's keeping Caleb with them is because she's been so desperately lonely on the farm, so isolated that it feels like an illness, and she's terrified of being alone again. The next day, John, trying to ease the tension, gives Caleb a tour of the farm. Later, the two go turkey hunting. As they walk, they visit the waterfall, where John explains the canceled water wheel project, still feeling uneasy about the idea. At dinner that evening, Caleb casually brings up the idea of restarting the water wheel project. John visibly tenses at the suggestion, his discomfort obvious. And, however, who had previously been against it, now seems more open to using the wood from her father's church to build the water wheel. Surprised by her change of heart, John softly tells her that she doesn't have to go through with it if she's not ready, sensing her inner conflict. Work on the water wheel project begins, and with it, the church is slowly torn down for materials. As the structure rises, so does the tension between John and Caleb, especially as Anne and Caleb spend more time together. Later that day, Caleb asks Anne to go for a walk. She agrees, and they stroll through the forest, enjoying the quiet. Eventually, they stop by a nearby cave to sit and talk. Their conversation is light and friendly, but the connection between them feels undeniable. As they head back to the farmhouse, they spot John working hard on the nearly finished water wheel. John notices them approaching, and seeing them together, relaxed and comfortable, stirs a deeper sense of jealousy in him. The three of them continue working on the water wheel, but the emotional tension becomes more obvious. Once the project is done, they celebrate with a big dinner, feeling a sense of accomplishment. That night, after a few drinks, they all head to the pond for a late-night swim, keeping the celebration going, and spends most of her time with Caleb in the water, while John quietly watches from the side. As the night cools, Caleb is the first to shiver and get out, heading back to the house. Anne and John follow shortly after, walking together in the cool night air. On the way back to the farmhouse, John, feeling emotional from the alcohol, tearfully confesses his love for Anne, and still surprised, takes John's hand as they walk back home together. She helps him to bed, upset that he passed out before realizing how much she wanted to be with him tonight. Walking down the hallway, she hears Caleb still awake in the bathroom. Unsure but curious, she heads to his door. Caleb opens it, and without a word, welcomes her in. After days of flirty exchanges, they finally give in to their attraction and spend the night together. The next morning, the air in the house feels different. There's an awkward tension, especially as Caleb and John sit together at the dining table. John watches them closely, realizing from their behavior what happened the night before. Later, the two men head over to work on the water wheel. As they get started, John breaks the silence, bringing up the events of the previous night. He admits that Caleb isn't a threat, and even says that Caleb being there made him realize how much Anne means to him. Caleb, after a moment of heavy thought, finally replies, "I don't believe you, sir. Jealousy doesn't suit you." They get back to work, putting the flume in place by the waterfall. John secures the ropes, while Caleb takes on the trickier part of positioning the flume. When he climbs up after finishing the job properly, Caleb loses his footing on the mossy, slippery surface. John grabs the rope and keeps it steady just in time, though inside he's struggling between letting him fall and finishing it off. John, holding the rope, looks at Caleb's face, and the screen fades to black as Caleb realizes what is about to happen. Later, John heads back to the house alone and approaches, ready to clear the air and apologize. But before she can say much, John cuts her off, telling her that Caleb has decided to leave and head south. Shocked and suspicious of John's story, and doesn't waste any time, she rushes outside, hoping to catch Caleb, but he's already gone. As the day drags on, the house feels empty without Caleb. However, Anne finds a bit of joy when she notices the electricity has been restored. She rushes outside, thrilled to find her old church organ moved into the barn. She sits down and begins to play, losing herself in the music. Soon after, John walks in and quietly sits next to Anna as she plays. His smile is slightly forced, as if he's trying to push aside the tension from the past few days. And, still playing, glances at him, feeling a flicker of distrust. There's no resolution between them, just a quiet understanding that some things are better left unsaid. Did you enjoy the recap? Please like and subscribe, and hit the notification bell to be updated next time we drop. Thanks for watching.